Hey everyone, welcome to class. I'm going to briefly be going over this final semester project with you and give you some directions to get you started so today you can begin working on this project. So this specific project is going to be covering not everything that we talked about this semester. It's just going to be covering Unit 7 as we've been looking at the revolutions of China. So you are going to be discussing the Cultural Revolution, which took place in the PRC from 1966 up until 1976. So you really need to keep it within that 10-year time frame. I don't want you really covering the Great Leap Forward. I don't really want you covering the Flower Movement or anything before that, the Long March, like none of that stuff. This is specifically meant to be around this time period during the Cultural Revolution under Chairman Mao of the Communist Party of China. Okay, so our objective today is to create a product / performance that shows how events of the Cultural Revolution affected individuals and how those individuals in turn have had an effect on society itself. Okay, and the historical thinking skill you're going to be using here is causation and contextualization, which we're going to look at that chart here in just a moment. But the big question is, how do you present this information? Okay, so what you need to do ideally is find someone to interview for this project. Okay, it could be a multiple array of people. It could be your relative, it could be your grandparents. That's a common one that a lot of students have used in the past. It could be a family friend. It could be friends of parents. It could be someone that you met at the gym. I did that when I was in high school. I had to interview a World War II vet, and so at the gym that my family was a member of, I met this guy who was in his 70s, and he was okay doing the interview for me. So I mean, try to find someone who was alive during this time period that you could interview. That's ideally what I want. If you are unable to do this, you are able to find an online primary resource to analyze that. And what I'm going to do here on PowerSchool is I'm going to post a document that Mrs. Hall has made for us to give you guys some examples, basically of an appropriate online primary source that you could use. Okay, there are examples of primary sources you could use. It should give you an idea of what I would be looking for. Ideally, you really should find someone to interview for this project. It makes it a lot more interesting and more personable because you're a part of the research. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at these requirements of what you're going to be needing. So the first requirement is a causation and contextualization chart. So you will need this before you actually hand in your project. Again, this chart is going to be on PowerSchool. This is 13 points, okay? So a large majority of your points are actually going to be coming from this contextualization chart. So you need to make sure you do this really well, and we're going to go ahead and look at it here. Now, for this chart, you are able to use bullet points. I'm going to allow it in this case, but you still need to be specific. So some of you, I've noticed with primary document analysis in the past, you're very vague and you don't give me details or specifics to what you're referencing and to what you're analyzing and to what you're evaluating or interpreting or identifying. But be specific. Give me some details about what you're identifying, about what you're evaluating, about what you're analyzing. Okay, so for the first section, it says identify challenges your subject faced, and this is going to be worth 2 points, half a point for each, so that totals to be total of 4 challenges. All right, half a point each. So in order to fully score on this, you need to have at least 4 challenges, and you can have more. You don't just have to have 4. If you want to have 5, that's fine, but you need to have at least 4. So for this, you could think of various different types of challenges that maybe they faced, right? If you think about a lot of the family relations that might have been altered or damaged. You could talk about social order and culture. There's so many different types of challenges that these specific individuals could have faced. I was talking to Mr. Prasad with Mr. Poole the other day, and he was telling us the story about a guy who actually used to work here at ICS, and he was an older man, but he actually partook in cannibalism in order to survive due to the severe famine that was happening across China. So that's a challenge, right? That's definitely a challenge that he had to face. So that's what I'm looking for. You need to list these specific challenges, okay? Okay, so the next portion, here you have historical contextualization. And here what I'm looking for is the analysis aspect regarding the detail of the challenges faced by your subject. So this is where you're actually going to be interpreting what your subject said or what the interviewee said and explaining how these relate to your understanding of the Cultural Revolution. So this is your personal interpretation. So you need to use your background information of the readings that I've assigned to you, and the documentaries that we've watched in class, and the discussions that we've had over Zoom. So this is what you're going to be doing here. Okay, you're interpreting data. So this is very important that you use your background knowledge. Okay, an example of this could be regarding the mass famine, right? So when we look at the Great Leap Forward, the economy is taking a massive hit during the Cultural Revolution. Because of the Great Leap Forward, you had the government trying to reach these unrealistic amounts of grain and resources. And what happened in those rural areas? It caused famine, right? And so because of this mass famine, nationwide, this man that Mr. Prasad told us about had to eat. He had to eat humans, right? He had to actually commit the act of cannibalism because there was no food left for the people in the village that he lived in. Okay, so this would be explaining and interpreting the challenge that he faced based off of the product or context of the Cultural Revolution. Now, in this next column here, we have the response question. Okay, so you had your challenge question, now you have a response question. How did they respond? Basically, is what you're answering here. How did they respond to those challenges? Okay, and you're going to reference that which is above. So if you don't have 4 challenges up here, you can't have 4 responses here. So you're going to be cutting yourself short. So make sure you have 4 challenges. Therefore, you can have 4 responses to those challenges. Okay, and then in our next column here, we have the causation question. This is where you will evaluate the impact your subject's decision had on themselves or other people. This is also going to be 4 points. So this is a cause and effect question. So what was the impact of their response to the challenge that they faced? Right? This is your interpretation of this, your evaluation of this, your analysis of this. So you need to actually use that language, cause and effect here. So if I'm talking about this famine, right, due to the cause of the extreme famine, hint I use the word cause there. Okay, this affected his decision to turn his own father in for a reward to gain grain, to gain a reward of grain so that he wouldn't die due to starvation. So let's say he sold out his own father so that he could have some food to keep him alive, right? Because he was starving. Okay, I'm just making that up, but I used the language there. I used due to the cause of the extreme famine and poverty. This then in turn affected his decision to ... right? So use the language cause and effect when you're looking at these 4 challenges that they faced. Okay, next we have the critique question. So for this column, uh, you have a total of 3 points available here. You're going to identify a pro, you're going to identify a con related to the Cultural Revolution faced by your source, and then you're going to state a definitive critique, all right, of the Cultural Revolution. So it's important for you to understand here that you get 1 point for stating a positive, you get 1 point for stating a negative. But then I want you to actually take a stance. You need to pick a side. You can't just say, I think they're both positives and negatives to this situation. You need to make a final conclusion decision. And what I want you to do here too is I want you to think long-term effects, right? Don't just think short-term, but think about the long term, related to the economy, related to social order, related to culture, related to science and technology advancement, right? Related to family relations. Think about these things and give a critique on one of them in order to gain that last point, okay? So look at it from a long-term perspective. I want you to really sit down and evaluate the entire Cultural Revolution. Look at where China is today. And, was the Cultural Revolution ultimately somewhat beneficial for them moving forward, or was it ultimately something that set them back? All right. So that is the contextualization chart. Now, going back to this previous document, we looked at the contextualization chart. Now you actually need to put together and create a product performance. So this will be worth 10 points, located in the rubric below down here, where you will see how your project performance will be graded. Okay. So how can you present this information? Well, you can go here and you can look at some of these previous final project examples. Mr. Poole went ahead and made a video of some rough sketches of some of the projects that students have left behind in previous years. Also in here you can see some of these documentary examples and some other video examples that previous students have done. This has been videos and documentaries, that's an actual video interview, has been a very popular choice where some of the students have really used their editing skills, their video editing skills, and done a great job as they recorded the entire video in Cantonese, and then they included the subtitles and translations. So a lot of work went into that. So it was very creative. But you could do other things. You don't have to do a movie trailer. You could write a newspaper column. You could present a eulogy. You could, if you want to get really creative, you could do some type of story or draw a graphic representation of this person's life. Or another common platform a lot of students have used is doing a journal. So if you guys do end up coming back in on the 25th, then I'll have several examples of maybe a newspaper, a journal that you guys could look at as well and get some inspiration. But I think you guys are creative, and I think you can do this on your own. I don't want you to look at someone else's work per se and then just try to copy what they've done. So be creative. I think that's important. You have all the guidelines of what you guys need to do, so you should be fine. Now, when looking at this rubric of how the performance will be graded, obviously the primary resource needs to be there. It needs to be the appropriate needs to be about the appropriate topic, and the primary resource needs to be clearly explained in your project. Creative and engaging, right? This is based on your actual performance of it. So it shows careful attention to detail. You don't have spelling errors. It's well spaced out. It's easy to follow. It's clear to understand. And then lastly, content of interview product and performance strongly states social and governmental relationships, as well as the primary sources individual perspective on the Cultural Revolution. So if you did this portion well and were very specific and detailed in the contextualization chart, then you really shouldn't have any issues with this portion, you should score all the points here. And then if you do a good job with creativity, keeping it somewhat engaging, clear and easy to read, you should get all your points there. And then obviously you need to have a quality primary resource. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this project. And then lastly, you'll have the peer review assignment, which is when after you turn it in, again, it's due on June 2nd. After you turn it in at the end of class, the following day, you guys will come back, and during that time period, we will look at each other's assignments, and you'll just do kind of a peer review reflection on each other's work. So easy points there as well. Okay, that's about it. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to email me regarding this project, and I will try to get back with you. Okay, take care.